Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. It's Monday night, and this time we're playing some Runestrike. There has been a new season, and with that, it of course brings new cards. And we're going to spend some time tonight talking about those cards. So let's get to it. Taking a look at what the new season has to offer. Well, I guess we'll claim our season back here. We actually have some packs to open, so we'll do that after we get through everything. But we are now actually into the Pandemonium season, and I was fortunate enough to get a spoiler, so shout out to the Runestrike team for that. And you can check out the other content creators for their respective spoilers. But we now have access to seeing all the cards for the season. So we're going to break them down, do our usual deal, and break them down one by one, and have the freshest, hottest takes about what the new season has to offer. Now, notably, you now can craft cards from the previous season, so if you missed out on anything there, you have the opportunity to pick up those. But for the Pandemonium season, we're going to start off here with Void Glutton. So first thing I want to point out is the artwork for this is awesome. Horrifying, but awesome. It looks really cool. It definitely has that eldritch horror feel to it, of like impossible physiology, tentacles. It's a monster. Apparently it's a demon though, not a monster, which is kind of interesting. So, what is Void Glutton? It is a 4/6 for 6 with Recover. Banish the lowest cost minion in your Void. If you do, this minion gains +1/+1. Now, coming down on turn 6, this is presumably going to get at least one thing, maybe two, assuming they don't remove it right away. Beyond that, it's going to depend on the build. Like maybe you're playing this in as the top end for an aggro deck, and then this is just a big dummy that's going to punch through. And because it grows on the back end, this is something that I think you do have to respect. It's actually something that's going to, air quotes, heal itself by buffing the back end. So it's going to be concerning. Is a 6/8 good enough? Yeah, this is the new set for this season. Luffy. Is this, I don't know, it's weird. This is not a 5 cost, so notably you'll get hit by Annihilate. It probably gets chopped down by 2 5 damage spells, or just 2 removal cards in general. At 6, getting a 2-for-1 is probably okay, but it's not immediately stabilizing the board for you. It's not immediately stealing back tempo from your opponent. It doesn't have a war cry. It doesn't even have a berry that's going to take something with it. It doesn't disrupt your opponent in any way. It's just a big dummy, which sometimes a big dummy is what you want. And notably, it's in Myth. It's a demon in Myth. It's a little rough because there's not going to be, what are you going to run it in Darlock, I guess? There's not as much demon synergy in this particular setup, that realm combination. But you could pull this off an Overlord, you could pull this off a Nightmare, and then all of a sudden Zekon has access to it. This guy, I think, is okay. He's dangerous because if you don't deal with it quickly, it will run away with the game. But I don't know that it's pushing significantly more damage than any arbitrary 6 cost would. And if you happen to have 2 removal cards that you can play back to back and the time to do so, it's not going to be an enormous tempo loss, you should be okay. So for example, if you're Nature and you go back to back Twister, or Feast or Famine into Twister, or vice versa, something like that, you're going to be okay. We're putting Chaos aside for the moment because look, if you have Annihilate, this thing just pops, right? If you're other factions, there's a number of ways to deal with it, and other realms have their own answers, but it does have a bigger butt than attack, so you could run into some challenges until we see some of the other cards for the season if you're playing light. I could see this thing getting played. I think without a way to protect itself, without a way to give it evasion, or without a way to have it immediately impact the board, it's tough for me to really justify this one, but we'll see. So we go from Eldritch Horror to another Eldritch-looking horror, and that is Azrak the Despoiler. So this is a... Chat's going to try and drown me with these hydrates. All hydrates. I'm going to run out of water before this, before I get to the third card. Azrak the Despoiler is a 3/6 for 5. It's a god, and it has Warcry. This gains +1 attack for each minion in your void. And then when it hits, when it attacks, strike, this loses 1 attack. So this is something that probably is going to have to be the top end of the curve for an aggro deck. The challenge here, similar to Void Glutton, is that it's just a big dummy. Now, you only have to have the 1 copy here. Chat's going nuts with the chomps, too. You only have to, or you're only allowed to have the 1 copy. I could see finding room for this in a build. I could see trying to squeeze it in. I don't know that I'm all that excited about running this guy. Whoop, I clicked on him and he disappeared. I'm not too concerned about you losing the attack, but without a way to give him Blitz, 6 health actually isn't that much. A Blitz minion plus a Blood ability. I mean, he's 5, so he fits in the sweet spot between Combust and Annihilate. If this thing came out as a, you know, you're applying pressure as an aggressive deck, your opponent wipes the board. You follow up with Azrak and pass turn, because that probably consumes your entire turn. Is this good enough? Well, how big do you need it to be for it to be good? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Because it's probably like a 7 attack, so it's a 7/6. That's pretty big. I don't know. I don't know why I'm not that enthusiastic about it. Again, I'm not too worried about the strike, because it's going to take a whole bunch of turns. Even as a 3/6, you know, if this thing went from got 4 clean attacks in, 7/6, 5, 4, and then is now a 3 attack, you're probably okay with it. At that point, you're fine. The game has been decided already at that stage. It's, as I understand it, based on the Discord comments, that's strictly for flavor. That it's supposed to be something like Azrak lives in the void, so his existence in our reality causes him to get weaker. And that's fine. I don't know. I think I'd rather have 2 minions, like 2 normal minions that we've already seen for the 5. Like I said, I could see topping an aggro curve with this. It's kind of okay. It's all right. So after that, we have Artful Dodger. Now, Artful Dodger is a 4-cost rogue mage that's a 2/5. With a rally, this moves to another friendly slot. And in BU1, this has evade. So there's a number of things that I'm not a huge fan about on this one. One, while the movement is cool, I think it would have been better if it had a rally of, if there's a minion in the opposing lane, dodge. It would have been more flavorful. It also would have kind of played into like giving some evasion to this. The evade is cute, but it's just as likely that this is going to end up in a weird lane that you don't want. This card seems bad. Yeah, I can't really say a lot of positive things about this. It's going to jump into a lane that to hit either their face or their bodies, like their minions, when you don't want it to. It's going to constantly feel like it's whiffing. Now, that's variant, so it could just as likely end up where you want it to be, but it also complicates your other plays. So it is a rally, so it's going to happen at the start of your turn and then influence your turn, as opposed to your turn influencing where it ends up if it were a recover. I just don't see a lot of value in this one. Maybe I'm missing something, but it's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily going to be positive. You know, like the rally is not necessarily a positive ability, and a 5-cost 2/5 with evade, I don't know. I'm not really sold on this one. 2/5 for 4 is a bad card. Bad return on investment. It makes combat just as awkward for you as it does for them. Yep. I would agree. So we'll move on from Artful Dodger. We'll talk about Cursed Lover. Now, this was my preview card, and I actually think this is pretty solid. I mentioned it in my preview article, which you can check over on the website. Got to check that out. You can see it down in the YouTube description, or exclamation point articles in the Twitch chat, since we're doing this live. And if you want to see some live Runestrike and other gaming, come on over to the live Twitch stream, RTChompGG over on Twitch. But Cursed Lover, 3-2 for 2. With a berry, draw a random undead from your void. Not Cursed Lover, though. It gains berry, summon a Cursed Lover from your void. I think this card is pretty solid. Yep, I do have a website, Luffy. I do have a website. I put some articles up there once in a blue moon, as well as the other content. But as far as Cursed Lover goes, I'm going to rehash a lot of the stuff from the article, but I think this card's pretty solid. You could run it in aggro. The body is respectable. It obviously wouldn't necessarily want to be the second thing you play, because then it just makes it awkward to make an undead die before the lover hits the board. But if you're able to hit a high enough density in an aggro deck that you can consistently play this later in the game, you know, you're going all in, or maybe not all in because you have this, but you're pressuring the board, your opponent clears the board, you drop Cursed Lover. Then they have to deal with it somehow, and then you're just refilling. And then that thing that died is also refilling. And you can set up somewhat of a loop. It's not a spectacular, like, never-ending infinite loop, but it's pretty solid. Now, in a more mid-rangey control deck, you can obviously leverage all of the berry and Warcry effects of the various undead in order to just loop different effects over and over again. I think Cursed Lover is going to show up a lot. I think there's a lot of ways to leverage and get value from this. Let's talk about Emancipator. So Emancipator is a 3-cost 2/5 with Flight, Veil, and Warcry. Draw the highest cost angel in your void. So as we've seen, there's a whole lot of void interaction with this particular set. I mean, it's what it's going to do. So, is this worth it? The body isn't bad, honestly. If there's a light-based aggro deck, I can honestly see this, and then your top end is like Angel of Despair. The reason being is that if you play this early, it's just an evasive, solid early game drop. I mean, it's not necessarily solid. It's not pushing a ton of damage, but it is difficult to remove, at least in combat. You can't really remove it out of combat because of the Veil. So you're going to be pressuring, and then if you draw it late, you can play the other angel first. When they kill it, okay, I'll pull it back. This card is as good as its interactions. Exactly. It's going to depend on how many more angels show up, because right now we are just straight up limited quantity-wise with angels. This is more of a seed card. As the seasons go on, we'll get more stuff and more things will show up. That does seem to be a fun tutor. Makes Faith even better now with 2 ways to get big cards. Yeah, I think this is reasonable. Like, this is a cool effect. I think this is going to be fun. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people initially trying out, hey, can you make Angel Tribal work? But I don't think that I don't think that's really going to happen, at least right now. This card doesn't really cost 5. True. It really costs like 11. It's 11, get an Angel of Despair, or it costs 12, get an Angel of Hope. That sort of thing. I don't know if those interactions are good enough. That's why I was saying if there is an aggressive deck that wants a difficult to remove flyer, maybe that's a home for it, even though the angel interaction may not necessarily be great there. You could top your curve out with the 8-cost angel. I don't think you really want Angel of Hope in an aggro deck, but maybe. If you just go with angels, Divine Intervention, which we saw a lot of people complain about last season, is still a thing where you end up... Either this has Veil, so it's difficult to remove. Angel of Hope has a Resurrect, so it's difficult to remove. It's possible that you will be, quote-unquote, guaranteed to have something on the board going into turn 10 so you can intervention, and now you have, what, a 12-15 with Flight and Veil? Good luck removing that. Like, there are things that could happen outside of what's presumed to be the intended interactions for this. I could definitely see this showing up, so I would keep an eye on Emancipator. So after that, we have Soul Erasure. which actually has kind of a unique and cool effect. So it's a 2-cost shadow spell that's enchant any slot. Occupy. Minions have bury, banish this. So banishing things means, for anybody that's not aware, it's going to actually remove it from the game. It's not even going to hit your void. This alleviates a number of, or provides a safety valve for a number of different things, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously, the any slot is you're not going to be putting it on your own slots, most likely. I mean, I guess you could. We now have a do stuff to the other side of the board card. Exactly, which maybe the most exciting thing about this is that it opens up the possibility for future cards to do things like this. To a degree, I agree it's a sideboard card in a game without sideboards, but there are enough effects, and I think the way Runestrike is structured from a rules perspective, like the way the game works, you're going to end up with decks that ultimately have like just an overabundance of these sort of effects that you'd be able to get something out of this. Now, personally, I clicked it again. Personally, I don't find a lot of my games, even as control decks, even with slow decks going up against other slow decks, hitting the void. Like, it just doesn't commonly happen. Like, maybe 1 in 20 games. What's enchant do? So it puts it, there are 5 lanes for this game, and then when you enchant a slot, one of your 5 lanes now has a permanent effect on there, usually a buff, but this is a debuff. So it's a new territory. I think this is pretty cool. I could see this getting, you know, if certain metas evolve. To Atona's point, it's somewhat of a reactionary sideboard card, which means that for ladder, it's always going to be like just on the periphery, and you'll get blown out by it because why are you running Soul Erasure? Well, they got beat 10 games in a row by something, so they put it in, and then they clobber you, even though their next 20 games, they'll never see a use for it. It's like an aura for the spot. Exactly. It doesn't go on a specific thing. It goes on everything that touches that spot. So you get more accrued value over time. As compared to, you know, you buff your one guy, and then you get 2 for 1. So overall, I do like Soul Erasure. I think it's a cool idea. I could definitely see this getting played. I don't know how much it's going to show up, but this could be a card that ends up getting, like, it may be worth running as a one-of in any shadow build, because you could just, the one time in each game where it gets value might be enough. But I think I need to play with this card to see if it's actually going to make a significant enough difference. As of right now, I would expect that it's just going to, as I mentioned, hang on the periphery and then eventually get involved. But maybe it'll see more mainstream play. We'll have to see how it works out. But going back to Terra Incognita, so this is a 2-cost order spell. Remove current enchantment from any slot. Occupying minion is stunned for 1 turn. And the question is, can it target a lane that isn't enchanted? I would expect that it cannot. If it could, I think this might have value just as stun that thing for a turn. And then, for that sort of effect, I'd want draw a card on it. If it was strictly stun a minion for 1 turn, I'd probably want it to be a cantrip, or maybe cost less, probably, maybe even both. But stunning a minion, even for a single turn in this game, can be huge because of the way combat works. If it can stun something independent of the enchantment, I think the value of this goes way up. There just plain aren't a lot of enchantments. You have the Morlich one, you have a couple legendary ones, you know, like Den of Thieves, the Thanksgiving one, Bountiful Harvest, or whatever. The Order one that gives shields both to you and your minion. The new Fairy one, the new Fae one. The Fae one's probably the only one you care about, because it's probably the only one you're going to see, honestly. Now, given that we already had Cursed Lover, maybe we're going to see a whole lot more Morlich enchantments. The problem is you're trading mana and a card for their blood. Is that good? I don't know. Oh yeah, Salen. Salen's a good call, but again, it's the same sort of argument of you are trading a card and 2 mana for the blood. Against Salen, that's probably a worthwhile trade because you are stealing or removing 5 blood worth of enchantments. So you are resource positive, in my opinion. How resource positive, I'm not sure. But it is, again, relevant because they're going to absolutely be putting a minion on those. So this definitely, like, way more so than Soul Erasure because you can get more value out of Soul Erasure against a variety of different things. I think that this is just... This one definitely feels like a sideboard card, unless you can just stun something. Like, just stun something. If you can't, I don't know that this ever gets played, honestly. Again, this is that awkward thing where if it can't target an unenchanted spot, it's a sideboard card in a game with no sideboards. Yep, exactly, like I was just saying. I don't know that this ever gets played if it can't just stun something. Which would be unfortunate, but maybe in the next set, because this is something that I always like to bring up, because we're looking at future sets, the devs are going to be, they're seeding cards for the future. It's entirely possible that they're going to just, the next season's going to have a gazillion enchantments, and all of a sudden, bang, Terra Incognita is very playable. As of right now, though, I'd probably leave this one at home. After Terra Incognita, though, we have Mana Spear. This is something you might not want to leave at home. So it's a 5-mana myth spell that's deal 5 damage to target enemy minion. Whenever you draw a rune, reduce the cost by 1 to a minimum of 1. We've learned our lesson with 0-mana spells and other effects. This card, I think, is really cool. We have Magus, who has a blood ability that can draw. We have a number of myth minions that can draw. We have a number of myth effects that draw cards. There's a lot of ways to reduce this, and even if you just wait a turn, it becomes a famine. Most of, if not, it's not 100% of the time, but we're talking like 99.9% of the time. When I play Feast or Famine out of nature, I'm choosing Famine. I want to remove something on the other side of the board. I almost never care about buffing my own guys. And honestly, it's cost me a few games because sometimes I'll end up targeting my own guy because of the rare time that I do want to play Feast, and then I accidentally famine my own guy because it's just muscle memory to click that one all the time. So Mana Spear will likely be an undercosted famine because odds are you can get this down to 3 relatively reasonably. In Magus, you're going to have it almost immediately at 4 because you're going to draw it for your turn. If your hand's not max, you draw a card off his blood ability. Bang, this costs 4. And now it's immediately on par. So I think this is a really solid card. Is it something that you're super excited about? No, it's just a solid removal card. But Myth didn't have something for the mid-range to larger stuff. You had Sever the Source. You had Dimensional Rift, which works all up and down the curve, but it bounces it. It doesn't actually kill the thing. And Arcane Overload is just rolling the dice. Mana Spear says, look, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do each time. This is, I think, pretty reasonable, and I expect to see Mana Spear show up. Spear is an odd card. You keep saying Famine, but Famine is minus stats, not damage. It's actually like a cross between Spear and Mana Burn. I mean, yes, the reason I'm comparing it to Famine is because Famine is specifically 5. So you can, in terms of breakpoints, there will of course be scenarios where Famine will remove things that are protected. Mana Spear cannot. So the 3/4 Light Priest that comes down and gives all your priests protected, you're not removing that. But it's something, you just didn't have very many options in Myth to be able to fit this niche. So I think it's a good overlap. Plus, there's a number of things. I think even Darlock specifically says draw a card from your Void. So Darlock is another champion that can run Mana Spear and immediately reduce the cost if you really want to. Usually you're banking, if not for A3, then for A1. But you have some flexibility here. I think this is a reasonable card. It's a solid card. Again, this is not the one that you're like, yeah, I'm real excited to get Mana Spear. But it's playable enough that I think we're going to see it. I guess the question is this better or worse than bouncing the minion? That's Sloth is fighting for, right? I could see this as a 3rd and 4th copy, in all honesty. So if you're running Dimensional Rift, you possibly want 4 removal cards, or at least 3. So you could then run this as the supplementary one, or go down to 1 Rift and then run 2 of these, depending on what the meta determines. If you need to fight through more mid-range and control, you probably want Dimensional Rift. The tempo advantage is really big. But there will be times where you just need more quantity of removal. In control decks, I could see wanting to just straight up remove things, but I'm not sure. Doing Rift, Mana Burn, and Spear, is it getting excessive? Possibly. Possibly. I don't personally tend to use Mana Burn as removal. It's very much a last-ditch thing. So having another option for the removal is worthwhile. And it is going to be more mana efficient than Mana Burn at different stages. It's obviously not going to be there all the time. Well, actually, it's always more mana efficient, because even at this cost, it's like 0 cost Mana Burn again, just with a cap of 5. It notably can't go face, so the trade-off is there, of course. I don't want to sell this as, oh yeah, this is better than Mana Burn. I hope nobody was interpreting it that way. But I think that, I mean, not to beat the dead horse, but I could see this finding a home. But I'm not, you know, you're not building a deck around Mana Spear. So after that, we have more removal, and this is Spiteful Gaze. This is a 4-cost light spell, where target enemy minion takes damage equal to the number of runes in your opponent's void. So this scales into the late game and actually gives light a way to remove big things towards the end of the game. Now, is this what light really wants? I mean, honestly, I think this kind of solves one of their issues, is dealing with a single large thing without having to go card advantage negative. So what do I mean by that? You previously would have to, say they drop Demonic Overlord, they drop, I mean, even like in Efreet. Well, Efreet isn't a good example, but not that Demonic Overlord's much better, because you could Bright Song either of those, but think of times where they have an enormous thing that you can't cleanly remove with those cards. You're going to have to cling to life and then follow it up with something else. This means you can just straight up kill something. Now, given the way the current meta is going, a single target removal, even for a big card, isn't necessarily great, and there are big things that will outsize this, even if your opponent has a significant chunk of their cards into their void, because we've seen in the past enormous void golems, and as of late, we've been seeing a lot of divine intervention blah, which means that these things are humongous. I think this is solid enough to be, at the very least, a one of in light, mid-range, or control decks. Obviously, you want to wait until late game. You're not going to be playing this in light-based aggro or something, because or even Brienne, because you're just not going to end up, like, the game's not going to last that long. It's never going to do that much. A single large thing with a big butt, specifically 7/7, is easy for light to remove. 7/9 is not. Exactly. I mean, light can deal with it, hence the whole cling to life example, but it's having to jump through hoops. You obviously only have so many cling to life. This allows you to deal with either of those threats in a relatively flexible manner, because you're just going to blow something up for 1 million. What do I expect this to do? Probably 10. Like, you could probably just sit and use your other removal, but if you need it as a mid-game thing, where it's doing somewhere between like 3 and 6, it's acceptable. You know, it's pretty solid. It's arguably a hard removal that's less situational than a lot of Faith's other options. Exactly. Yeah, I think it's solid. It's similar to the Spear, where I could see this getting played because it's conditional. It's less conditional, less situational, as pointed out by chat, than other light removal. That doesn't make it not situational. But I think it's good enough to get played. I think. This contingency on relying on their void, it's weird, because if you're not losing, you know, if you have a really bad hand, your opponent gets out to an explosive start, you may just die because you drew Spiteful Gaze and literally cannot remove anything, because you didn't kill anything before that. Therefore, they have nothing in their void. It's a situation that could happen. Is it likely? Probably not, but, you know, it could get messy. But I think Spiteful Gaze is good enough to get played. I think it's good enough to get played. All right, last one up, at least for this set, is Disorient. So Disorient is a 1-cost chaos spell that is the next rune that your opponent draws costs 2 more to a max of 10. This is quite obviously targeted for Zcon, right? I don't know what other deck wants this. You could make an argument that an aggro deck would, if they are disruptive enough, you could play this and then you're not necessarily playing it and then hoping that your opponent, oh, well, I play it the turn before their Twister is online, or their Meteor Storm, or even their Arcane Overload, whatever. And then they drew it off the top, so now it costs 2 more. I get another turn. It's like, what are the odds that you did that? It could easily be in their hand or the next draw. Adding a card to their hand isn't drawing it, though, right? Correct. The reason I was saying Zcon would want this is obviously it's a Chaos card, but it plays into the idea of stuffing things into your opponent's hand, giving them less options to be able to do things. Now, we don't have a lot of discard, like ways to make your opponent discard things out of their hand. If we did this, I think this might be stronger, because then you can strip away options, and then the one that they draw, they can't even play. Notably, this is not costs 2 more for a turn. It just costs 2 more. So whatever the thing is getting delayed. It's not like they can just sit on it and wait a turn. We saw that in the Shadow card. I can't think of the name of it. That just makes everything for 1 turn cost extra. This is feasible. I want to try it out. Like I said, it adds onto the Zcon hand stuffing plan, I guess, because now they have other cards they can't play. You fill their hand up with tortures, and then all of a sudden they're not drawing any other cards, and they just kind of have to take turns off. You gain this tempo advantage as a result. I don't know. Like it says, this might be... that might be the case, Atona. I'm not a huge fan of this card right now. I do want to try it. We will give it a whirl once we unlock it. But as of right now, this feels like... I want to say win more, but I don't know if that's actually true. I don't know if this impacts your opponent at all, except in some very, very corner case scenarios. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of this, but we're going to be trying it out at some point. So this is Siphon Void, and this one's actually pretty cool. So Siphon Void is a 4-cost nature spell that you shuffle 3 minions from your Void into your deck, then draw 2 runes, and reduce their cost by 1. Now, this is only, obviously, a once per game thing. Well, I mean, there are ways to, I guess you could do it again, but... It allows you to do some unique things. It gives you cost reduction in a realm that doesn't typically have it, specifically nature. It gives you card draw, and it allows you to cycle back relevant things. What deck actually wants this? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but given that it specifically shuffles back 3 minions, even if you are setting up the recursion for only a single minion, that might be a specific thing you want. Yeah, Keeper Lock probably does want this, Doc. Keeper Lock probably does. I could definitely see it there. I don't know if it's necessarily better for Keeper Lock than Scout Ahead. And I don't know that you want 3 Scout Aheads, but it's possible. I could definitely see this showing up in a whole bunch of decks. Like, there's a whole bunch of nature decks that probably want to give this a whirl. But that's all of the cards for this season. There are some new cosmetics. This is a pretty cool card back. I'm actually looking forward to unlocking this. Chat, you got to remember to, or you got to help me remember. You got to remind me to put that card back on because it looks pretty cool. So if we go back to the beginning, just to close up about this piece, and then we'll jump into games and stuff. Overall thoughts on the set. I think there's some good high points. I think Curse Lover's pretty strong. I think the Nature Legendary is pretty strong. I could see value with Emancipator. The other ones, for the most part, are either fringe playable. You know, they have their unique edge cases. Soul Erasure possibly is more generally valuable. But Mana Spear, Spiteful Gaze, possibly Terra Incognita, but less so than those two. I could see them showing up depending on different things. Azrak, like we talked about, maybe top the curve. Void Glutton, I'm sure it will steal games, but there's now a ton of big dummies in, or feels like a bunch of big dummies in Myth. Disoriented Artful Dodger make me real sad. Puts me real sad. Or makes me real sad. I don't know. I was reading Doc's comment, especially the version I have where I put 3 of the idle dudes in my Void. Fair. You take Void damage and you bring something from Void into deck. I doubt it because it doesn't say draw, and I think you take damage from the Void on draw, but I could be wrong. But yeah, this is... I think I like this offering. I'm not as excited. I think it's weird that and this is a me thing, I keep comparing everything to 2 or 3 seasons ago when we got Brood Guardian. That set release, that season release, was spectacular. And I feel like I'm constantly comparing everything to that, and we're now a few removed. And this is on par, maybe you could argue a little better or a little worse than the last season with the Fae. So I don't think that this is like out of line with the seasonal offerings. But there are just a lot of situational things here that I'm not super excited about, so it seems to be influencing my overall opinion. But realistically, if you look at any other card game, the percentage of cards in any given set of playables is probably lower than what we get in Runestrike. It just feels kind of weird because of the release model. And I think people need to keep that in mind. But there are definitely things to be excited about. Like I said, Curse Lover, Emancipator, the Nature Legendary are the highlights for me. So I'm looking forward to trying this out. But that's going to do it for this card breakdown. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.